Welcome to How to Build a Nonprofit, the only podcast dedicated to deep dive interviews with nonprofit founders about their journey, their why, board development, fundraising, staffing, leadership, and making a big impact. We ask courageous and visionary founders about their struggles and successes and everything in between. As a listener, all you have to do is learn and appreciate. I'm your host, Jordan Thierry, and this is How to Build a Nonprofit. In this episode, I interview Rachel Johnson-Farias, founder and executive director of ESQ Apprentice in California. Rachel grew up in Stone Mountain, Georgia, where she excelled in school and in music. She developed an early interest in the law, or more so, the system of injustice that she saw needed fixing. She moved to California to attend Occidental College after high school, and against the advice of her mentor, enrolled in law school in pursuit of becoming a practicing attorney one day. But after finishing her law degree, she encountered major roadblocks at the final steps towards realizing her dream, and it was through these hardships that the idea for her organization was born. In our interview, she speaks candidly about how the do everything for everyone mindset can quickly lead to burnout, how to build sustainable practices as a leader, and why she believes her organization can help upend systemic injustice. She drops some serious gems throughout our conversation and shares valuable insights on the roles of persistence, personality, and purpose in organizational leadership. All of this and more in today's episode, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Perfect. All right. We are live. Rachel, you can hear me okay?
I can.
All right. Great. I can hear you as well. You sound fantastic. Really excited to have you on the podcast. Excited to learn more about Esquire Apprentice. And so if you don't mind, can you just share a little bit about like what Esquire Apprentice does and what your mission of your organization is?
Yeah, I am Rachel Johnson-Farias, founding executive director of ESQ Apprentice, and we are closing the women's racial wealth gap, one apprentice lawyer at a time. In California and 3 other states, you can become a lawyer without going to law school via legal apprenticeship. And so we utilize that model to help low-income women of color become lawyers without law school and without debt, which is really key to their journey towards economic security.
Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah.
And so you are also a lawyer. You went to law school. Going back to before you actually started your organization, what made you want to become a lawyer?
Yeah. I was actually headed to Broadway. I had visions
Really?
of grandeur. Yeah, no, I went to college. I went to a liberal arts school, but that was only because when I had the opportunity to go to Juilliard out of high school for voice, I was like, I don't know if I can just sing for 4 years. I haven't made up my mind. So I ended up going to Los Angeles to Occidental College. And one of the things that drew me there was like, its proximity to Hollywood. So I was like, maybe I'll just, I'll do my thing in school, but maybe I'll get discovered. They weren't discovering 5'2" chubby Black women so much on the streets in Hollywood at that time. Things have changed a bit. But so I went, and I actually ended up getting really active in the student scene there. I started my major with a bunch of other folks, critical theory and social justice. And through that major, I really learned a lot about our legal system. And so I loved researching and finding like that little needle in the haystack, that thing in history that was like, ooh, see, I knew we had been here before. And learning from the past in order not to repeat the mistakes. And my advisor said, Rachel, I know your heart. And, I do not go to law school. Someone had told me, if you love research, go to law school. And she was like, law school, I've been. It is not the place for innovation. It is not the place for activism. It's very concerned with the status quo. You're going to feel like you're under attack like every day you're there. Don't do it. And unfortunately, I'm the type of person when you're like, don't do that, Rachel. I'm like, really? So I ended up applying. I did the UCLA Law Fellows program. I got into law school. They helped pay for the applications. And I went really determined that law school wasn't going to get me. I took her advice to heart. I said, they're going to try to attack me, but I'm going to do my thing. It really was this wonderful experience. And I learned that for me, criminal justice is also reproductive justice. My first job in law school was with this prison abolitionist organization called Justice Now, based in Oakland, Oakland, California. And I was not a prison abolitionist when I went there. I obviously, with my family's experience, a father who had been incarcerated, a brother who had been incarcerated, I didn't love the legal system, but I was like, we still need it, don't we? And they really just opened my eyes to that 13th Amendment fact, and it made me think like, oh, actually, no, we don't. I ended up working on doing some of the initial research for what would become a bill that passed that outlawed sterilization, forced and coerced sterilization in women's prisons in California.
Wow.
And
I'm familiar with that. That's
Yeah.
incredible. That's huge. I mean, terrible, terrible injustice that's
Mhm.
been done to many women, Indigenous and Black women in particular in California, with forced sterilization. And yeah, came upon that the passage of that law in my research,
Yeah.
several years ago. So thank you for that. That's incredible.
I love doing the work, and I didn't carry it to the finish line. I was like in the beginning, it took
Sure.
10, 12 years, maybe
Yeah.
even 20, because they were working on it before I got there. But what I found is that there were very few laws within the US that we could use to say that's wrong. We had to go to an international human rights
Wow.
framework in order to try to secure the human rights of incarcerated people in the United States. And so all of that, critical theory and social justice in undergrad, and then in law school, taking these courses that really helped me understand that this system that we've been handed, just at its foundation, doesn't work for people who look like me. You know what I mean?
When you were in college and undergraduate at Occidental College, your teacher or mentor warned you not to go to law school. You ended up going anyway. And at the end of the day, would you say that, was she right?
I loved my law school experience, but I think it's because I had that warning. I was one of maybe 6 or 7 Black women in my law school class at Berkeley. And I went in like, I'm going to work hard, but I'm also going to play hard. So I took advantage of every extracurricular I started doing clinical work my very first semester. They had this student run workers' rights clinic. Because for me, I'll say this, I think law school is very theoretical. Like the most prestigious tracks that you can take are moot court. And it's like this one day I will argue in front of the Supreme Court and I will argue ideals. And so they give you like the theory of law and what it's supposed to be. And you go back and forth philosophically, but the practice of it is not actually something in my experience of law school that we got a lot of. So I think if I wasn't doing the practical training, if I wasn't serving clients from the beginning, I might have had a different experience. But I was always doing that, was it Paulo Freire, that praxis, right? I was always trying to combine the theory to the practice and see like, what's the point of doing law if we're not talking about how it impacts our people?
Right.
And so as long as I was having that balance, law school was a lot of fun for me. I had a good time, but I think it's rare. I think there are very few people, especially people of color I've spoken with, who would left law school and said, that was fun. I love that ride,
I have enough attorney friends to know that the California State Bar exam is one of the most difficult in the nation. What was that experience like for you, taking the California State Bar exam?
Long, hard, identity defining, challenging. I failed the California bar 3 times before I passed on my 4th attempt.
Wow.
And when I was failing each of those times, it's a 2-day test now. It was a 3-day test. So I studied so hard for that test. And I'm what folks call a K through JD. So from kindergarten until I got my law degree, I was like a locomotive. Get out my way. I'm going to do what I set my mind to and nothing will stop me. That test stopped me. And the first time it stopped me, I had a community of folks who were like, yeah, a bunch of us get stopped at the first one, especially people of color. Here are these resources. Try this tutor. You'll get it next time. I actually, when you pass the bar, you don't know your score. When you fail, you get your scores. And I came within 5 or 10 points each time that I failed the bar exam. So it was excruciating, but I would show people those scores and they'd be like, oh, you're so close. Just do this one thing. Just do this one thing. So the first time I was like, all right, I had this fellowship. My job was secure. I shook it off. I took it again. And then I failed the second time. For context, they only offer this test twice a year. So you can either take it in February or July. So I failed July and then I failed February. At this point, I still have some time left in my Equal Justice Works Fellowship. So I'm not like freaking all the way out. But I'm like, if I don't figure this out in a year, I might not have a job. What's going on? I did all the main courses. I did like Barbary Kaplan. It didn't work for me. I got a tutor. I studied so much my nose bled, which I'd only seen in movies, but I was like going over something and drops of blood were coming down my nose. And I was like, I think I need need to sleep, that kind of thing. I was up
Yeah.
to 8 hours a day, every day, like 2 hours in the morning before work.
My
Work,
gosh.
2 hours at lunch, home, dinner, 2 hours, sleep, 8 hours. I was very regimented. I was extremely disciplined. I took the approach of like that I had taken K through JD is like, as long as I keep working, I will pass. And so I took it a third time and I failed again. And if the second time knocked me on my knees, the third time knocked me on my back, I was just like, I don't even know what I'm doing. What is going on? It didn't make any sense to me. I knew the stuff inside out. Meanwhile, I had helped pass legislation throughout the state of California that eliminated fees for juvenile record sealing, making myself like my goal when I got my fellowship, when I started California's first juvenile record sealing clinic, was to make myself unnecessary. I think that's always my
Yeah.
goal as a lawyer is like, if we
Yeah.
can get to a time where we don't need lawyers and everyone
Yeah.
has their own information and can advocate for themselves, that's when I'll know that the legal system is like, it's working. And so I was achieving that, everything I set out to do as a lawyer, but I was not passing the bar exam. And that third time, I decided it's the keep going, keep going, keep going and going. It doesn't work. I finally said, you need to rest. And so even at the sake of like, I was about to end my fellowship, they were like, you better take it again or else you might not have a job. And I was like, I'm more important than the test. I need to really figure out why I want to do this, why I'm spending $1,000 every 6 months. That's how much it costs to take the bar, $1,000
Wow. Yeah.
that I didn't have.
Yeah.
I need to figure out why I'm doing this. And so I took some time off between the third and the fourth time I took it. I skipped that next, February. I started, just focusing on my wellness. I really started asking myself why you want to do this. And the two things that I came to that made me get up and take the bar one more time was one, I wanted to be a lawyer because lawyers have a confidentiality that rivals priests. It might even be like even more so. I wanted to be that person in the room that you could say anything to. And then the second thing was getting into prisons. So I went back, rested, took it a fourth time. And that's the time I passed. Unfortunately, my job was over in between the time I took it and the time I found out I passed. But the universe kind of conspired to put ESQ Apprentice in my life. I'm happy to talk about that more, but that was my journey to law licensing.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So let's get into the starting of your organization. You recently came into your 10th year, right? Or celebrated your 10th year as an organization.
Hooray!
Congratulations. That's an awesome
Thank you.
anniversary. Huge milestone. 10 years ago, tell us about like where things were 10 years ago.
So 10 years ago, I was in the midst of failure. I had talked about my individual failure with the bar exam, but I was also witnessing systemic failure with the juvenile record sealing. I had this one client whose record I helped seal, who had been turned out into sex work when she was like 12. She loved an older man. Older man abused her. It's a pretty typical story in that regard. She picked up a lot of loitering and other offenses from 12 to 18. And at 18, around about 17, found out she was pregnant and decided she wanted to turn her life around. And that's where, I came in and I was like, yes, let's do it. Let's go. And it was such a positive experience for her and me. She got to stand in front of the same judge who had said, no, who adjudicated her guilty. In juvenile context, you aren't convicted, you're adjudged or adjudicated. So in front of that same judge, she stood, she said, I'm turning my life around. I'm the mom I want to be. And that judge said, I'm proud of you, sealed her record. And she came out of that courtroom so excited. She was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. I want to help girls like me become just get out of this life. I think I want to be the lawyer. I want to stand next up to them in the courtroom. And I was like, let's go. Let's do it. Okay, first, we got to get your GED. Then you'll have to do some combination of community college or undergrad. It might take 4 to 6 years, but I will help you with scholarships. Don't worry. After you do that, we're going to go to law school. But I know some programs and I can help you get some. And I just saw her like, okay, well, I don't have 10 years to try to get, I have a situation now. I guess not. And I knew in that moment, as much as I knew in the law school classes, like you're really doing a disservice by not letting these advocates, make them question this more so they can be better advocates. Yeah. She was asking all the right questions and advocacy was nowhere near available or accessible for her.
Sure.
So later maybe that week, I'm at the law office. I know my job's running out. I know I'm failing the bar. We have summer students. I bumped into a summer student. I said, what law school do you go to? And they're like, oh, I don't go to law school. I'm apprenticing to be a lawyer. I went, what is that?
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh yeah, I'm over with Ed over in here, and like in this state, if you study so much with an experienced attorney, you can be a lawyer." I said, "Huh, huh," and I went home and I looked it up, and I was like, "This is it. This is how I get my client." Who I just, had talked to and said she can't, she's like, "I don't have time for that." This is how she becomes the lawyer she'd wish she'd had all along the way. And it was like the call came. And so I wrote down the who, what, when, where, why that day. And I didn't pursue it maybe for about like 6 months because I was still trying to figure out how I was going to pass the bar and keep my job. Because it wasn't, it was a great idea. It felt like a call, but it was not funded.
Right. And you hadn't passed the bar yet.
And I hadn't passed the bar. So I wrote it down, kept it to myself. When I realized, like, after I failed the third time, like, I'm taking some time for me. That's when I started looking into potential funding for it. And I applied for an Echoing Green fellowship. At the time, it was Black Male Achievement, because I thought I was creating this for my clients who were about 95% Black and brown men and boys. So I applied and I didn't get it the first time, but I made it to the finalist stage. And they flew me to New York and I did the interviews and it just on an idea.
Yeah.
And I'll forever be grateful to Cheryl Dorsey at Echoing Green. I don't think it's a coincidence that a Black women-led organization would take a chance on an organization like ours.
Yeah.
But when I got to the finalist stage, even though I didn't get it, I was like, I think this could work. I think I could do this. So that was 10 years ago. At the same time, my husband and I, we were both unemployed. We were trying to decide, we were newlyweds. Are we going to start a family? What are we going to do? He just finished grad school and was having trouble finding jobs in the Bay. And we decided, 1, we were going to start a family. 2, that he was going to go to work because he was much more comfortable doing a traditional like 9 to 5. And 3, that I was going to pursue ESQ Apprentice wholeheartedly, like put my all into it to try to get it funded. And so we went until we ran out of money, or just before we ran out of money, my husband got a call back for a job. And we were like, wow, okay. Look at when 2 people agree, right? So he got the job. I applied to get for 501c3 status for ESQ Apprentice. I did they used to have this pathway in the middle, like you didn't have to do the big 1023. You could do like a mid-size one if you didn't think you were going to have more than $50,000 over 3 years. You could just do a fast track. So I did the fast track 1023. And then within a week, I found out I was pregnant with my first child after we had received an infertility diagnosis. And so it really was like,
whoa, that's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot of good stuff. And it is like, that's been, if I can say one thing as a nonprofit leader, that origin story, cemented for me, is you got to go trust your gut and go on faith. Like when the call comes, answer. And everything you need to answer will be there. I think when we started, I put $110 in the bank. That was all the extra money I had. I was not getting paid. And I paid like the postage and the filing fee for the 1023. And then it was just me and a board of friends and family. I had 3 board members, 2 of my dear friends and my husband. And for a year, so that's how we went. Like, we didn't have funding, didn't have all these things. When I got Echoing Green, I could finally pay myself again. I did not pay myself enough.
Sure.
I, started my salary where I had left off with the nonprofit law firm, and it wasn't in the Bay Area. It wasn't enough.
Yeah. Can you remind me just the Echoing Green, how much you get for that?
Then it was $90,000 over, I want to say 18 months.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
I would say more than the money, it was the networks it opened. Yeah. So it ended up being not just the seed to get things started, but it bloomed fairly quickly into like getting some support for the organization.
That's incredible. I think, we may have been in the same pool of applicants, and
really?
I applied in 2013 and 2014. I didn't get it either time.
Yeah.
But
I think that was 2017, 16
or
17 when I
okay. So you were,
you
a
little
were
bit
after
later.
me. Like towards the
Were you
end
Black
of
Male Achievement too?
I applied for it. Yeah. That's when I applied for it. Yeah. But that's awesome. Congratulations. For folks who don't, Echoing Green is a really great organization, initiative that supports, early stage nonprofit founders. And it's helped launch a lot of really incredible organizations. So cool. So Echoing Green helped you get your first real significant check.
Yeah.
and led you to other additional funders. You were able to start paying yourself.
Yep.
Um, at what point were you like implementing your program, like actually starting to, do work with people?
Yeah. That took a little longer. Constantly battling, but winning these days, the struggle with perfectionism, I think, one of those, somewhere along the way, someone told me your organization will be ready to go if you have 2 years of runway. Like if you can play your staff for 2 years, that's the gold standard. And as soon as someone told me what the gold standard was, I was like, must achieve gold standard. I'm getting help now.
Yeah.
And knowing that's not right. But it actually is why I'm really grateful that my first board was dear friends and family, because after about maybe a year, one of my board members, Serena Rankin, sat me down and was like, sis, product is king. You need to start doing the thing.
Exactly.
Not
Yeah.
everybody's going to fund an idea. Like
Yeah.
Echoing Green is going to fund an idea because they've
Yeah.
got a transformative leader and a woman of
Mhm.
color who knows that
Yeah.
it takes a lot to build the infrastructure.
Mhm.
But everybody's not going to fund that. You need to start. And so we started. We got 2 or 3 apprentices to register with the State Bar of California. Hit some hiccups even right out the bat with that. We just started piloting, started testing. And it would take 10 years. Actually, this last year, so about 9 years is when we went through a program redesign. Like it took about
Okay.
a decade to learn like what we were doing, but more importantly, what worked and what didn't work about what we were doing.
Sure.
When I set out, I, in hindsight, realized I was basically trying to be what the government is supposed to be. I was trying to be like the wraparound legal resources provider. I was trying to during the pandemic, we ended up giving cost of living stipends that ended up being guaranteed basic income, like rivaling those programs.
Wow. Yeah.
I put everything into the program, and I was a staff of 1, had some contractors help, some capacity from outside, but I was trying to be everything for everyone.
Yeah. You were trying to create like basically every kind of support that someone would need to not fail or not, stop their pursuit of the apprenticeship program pathway. Yeah.
I was trying to solve the individual and the systemic problems by myself.
At the same time, yeah.
And it doesn't work.
No. Yeah.
It doesn't work. And it's really frustrating because I know what it takes. It's like, it's not rocket science. Yeah. We know what it takes to eliminate poverty. And in some ways it did work. Like some of the people who were in our program then, one of them was working 3 gig jobs when she joined ESQ Apprentice and no benefits, single mom, 4 kids, month to month. And because she was working so much, she wasn't spending any time with her kids either. When she joined ESQ Apprentice, it was like, we're going to get you that job. Sat with her, did the resume, did the applications. She ended up getting a paralegal job at a public defender's office and consistently went up the ranks and has been promoted year after year after year. She has 1 job now with benefits, some of the best benefits in the state of California. And then she would bring her kids to class when we would have our classes. And they were like, well, now I want to live my dreams because I see mommy living her dreams.
Wow.
So it worked. It worked, but it also didn't in the sense of I was completely burned out.
Yeah.
All the money was going into the program and it was not sustainable.
Sure.
It was like, this is just going to run out. We aren't doing any renewable. There's nothing in here that's going to renew. And so if I, for folks who have the vision, because I could see it clearly, but it was like, how do I get there? I think it works best when you're giving and receiving. There has to be a cycle.
Sure.
And I was at a point where I was giving, but I wasn't getting a whole lot back.
Yeah.
And that is the recipe for burnout.
Did you have staff at this point, or were you just solo for most of this journey?
Solo for most of it. I mean, I had my friends and family board. I think we moved to a second board. I had a lot of people rooting for me. I had some funders who really were really invested in trying to connect me to resources, but I didn't have the capacity personally to engage with a lot of those resources.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the resources to hire anyone. It was, I just got off the phone with a funder maybe yesterday. And they were like, yeah, we saw your finances and unfortunately it's not going to work for us. I mean, this is what a lot of nonprofit Well,
Yeah.
maybe not a lot, but for me and a lot of the other women of color leaders I know running nonprofits, that's like a common thing. They don't trust us with money. And anytime the money looks like it's like not being well kept, it's this, see, I knew it. We can't invest in you. You're not a good return on investment, all these
Yeah.
things. I've been telling people, I swear I'm going to write this article. I've already got a draft, but like, would modern philanthropy fund the Underground Railroad?
Ooh, I love that. I love that. Do that.
And the answer, I mean,
Yeah. Oh, I think we know the answer. Don't spoil it. No spoilers. No spoilers.
but
Yeah.
it's very much that. It's like there are a lot of leaders with a vision for how we, not just for how we like fix stuff, how we get free,
Free. Right.
how
Right.
we create the pathways and the
Yeah.
infrastructure for anyone who sets their mind to like, I don't want to be enslaved in the system anymore to
Yeah.
get free. And there are very few people in philanthropy who are willing to say, I see that path toward,
Yeah.
I'm going to fund that.
Yeah.
Right. So I got a lot of that and I couldn't afford to hire anyone. I barely could pay myself for
Right.
maybe 6 years,
Yeah.
5,
Yeah.
6 years. So I was doing the program, getting by. In hindsight, go me, right? That's a,
Yeah.
when it
Absolutely.
took it
Go
like that, it
you.
kept
Yeah.
going and we still got people
Absolutely.
getting jobs. But I only served, or not only served, I served about maybe 13 to 16 women in that time, which for
Yeah.
me was monumental. But for
Right.
funders was like, do you really care about this work?
And is that you, would you say that's sort of the challenge in reference to the funder conversation you just mentioned? Basically they're saying, okay, you've got, $500,000 a year that you're bringing in and spending, and this is going to help, however many, 15, 20, 30 women. And basically they're saying that's not enough. Our money needs to go further to impact more people.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
pretty much it's, you could help hundreds with this. And, I've learned not to either or anything. I both
Sure.
and. They're not wrong all the way, right? Like there
Right.
is in our program redesign, we did figure out a way to reach more people. So we went from like serving 13 to serving 60 a year.
Yeah.
In 1 year. And that's because we implemented a pre-apprenticeship program, the accelerator.
Okay.
Because in that like better part of a decade when we were working with folks, we learned, hey, folks think they want to be lawyers, but they don't actually
Sure.
know what lawyers do. And then after like a year or two in the program, they'd figure out, I actually don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
This isn't what I thought it was. And so we'd have to start over, right? So we
Yeah.
learned we actually should serve more people, but it's when you serve them that matters.
Sure.
We need to serve more people at the beginning. So they
really
can make an
understand. Right.
informed choice about the career path they want to pursue. And
Sure.
so like I mentioned the person who went on to get the PD job and,
Yeah.
in our accelerator that we launched this last year, we had someone who was like, thank you for this 10-week program. It made me understand I don't want to be a lawyer.
Sure.
And that was a win for me too.
Yeah.
Because you get that
Yeah.
clarity and it's tantamount to having a career versus having just jobs.
Absolutely. And I think, if a young person, or it doesn't, if one of the women in your program, gets on the pathway to even like a paralegal
Mhm.
profession or
Yeah.
career, or if it goes all the way to, passing the bar and becoming an attorney, like that's a career, right?
Yes.
That is like
Yes.
decades of impact. And so, so many nonprofits face this challenge of like funders, donors, looking at their numbers and saying, basically doing the math and saying, you're telling me it's $55,000 per person to make an impact. And you're like, well, how much is someone's life really worth to you? But we have to, be, principled and creative in how we articulate what the real value is of our work and the impact that we're making.
Exactly.
Because if you were to juxtapose it to the prison system, well, they're putting
Mhm.
way more dollars into,
Way
what they call
more.
rehabilitation, right? Which is only doing more harm. But then
Exactly.
even, looking at the parallel between workforce development system and
Mhm.
how much workforce development systems cost and invest per, person they serve, it's a lot more money. It's way less effective,
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
having to like juxtaposition those realities with the
Mhm.
work that you're doing is hard. It's unfair, but it's like also part of what the role is, right?
Right. And I mean, and change takes time. And that's, I would say,
Huh?
is the other thing that has been a big barrier to getting the resources we need is folks want to see in and out the door within 3 months, within a year. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
that's not how
that's
it
when
works.
you take the emergency room approach, you're going to end
Yeah.
up back in the emergency room.
Right.
We're trying to
Right.
heal this. We're trying to heal the underlying
Yeah.
disease, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And poverty don't take no days off.
Right. Right.
That's the other thing that happens. So many women in our program would join, and
Yeah.
then they'd be ready to go, and then within 6 months they'd be unhoused. In 6 months they'd be fleeing a
Yep.
domestic violence situation. In
Yeah.
6 months their kid would get sick. In 6 months their
Mm.
parent would pass. You know,
Yeah.
and it's like, and then they'd be like, all right, I'm gonna take some time off and come back. They take the time off, they come back. 1 year later, another parent passes. 1 year later,
Yeah.
they lose the house again. Do you know what I mean? It's like poverty is relentless in its poison, and it's venomous, and it just keeps going and going and going. And there's this mismatch I'm learning, and I think this happens in the workforce development field too, where it's like there's a side of workforce development that is really industry, employer, funder driven, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like, just
Totally.
get them in the door, make them do the work,
Absolutely.
make them produce, da 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 da. And then there's what I call workforce development, but what we try to do at ESQ Apprentice, Women of Color-centered workforce development, that really centers the person and the community need.
Mm.
And that's a much longer process. That is
Mhm.
like, don't just get any job. That's get the job that serves your career.
Absolutely.
Because you will get tested. You will walk into the courtroom and they will say, defendant, get out.
Yep.
What's going to keep you going back? How are you going to do that process where you can say, this is still for me. I still have a clarity around what I want to do with this and to do it in a lasting way. 60 to 70% of people who graduate law school end up starting their own firms, going small or solo. It is absolutely a normal path for folks. And so for the apprentices, I hope that that's what they do. I
Right.
had a vision for ESQ Apprentice. What if, when I lived in West Oakland, there was a liquor store every 2 blocks?
Sure.
What if, keep the liquor store fine, I'm not going to judge that. But what if upstairs from the liquor store was a law office?
Yeah.
What if I could just be like, oh, housing attorney's right there. Let me just go ask a question real quick.
Right.
And
right.
that's the promise of apprenticeship. That's the
Yeah.
you don't have to leave home. You don't have to go out of pocket. You don't have to get into 6-figure debt, which follows you, by the way. 7 years, I did public service loan forgiveness out of law school. So my law school helped pay off my loans. But when we stabilized, my husband and I both had income, 2 young children. We decided, okay, it's time to buy a home. Let's see what we can do. The market seemed like it was all right then. And I get there and they're like, that back end debt to income ratio.
Yeah.
What is
that's
this?
not.
What is this over here? And I was like, but I'm getting help and they're going to pay it. And in 10 years, it'll be forgiven. And luckily under the last administration, it was, because under this regime, who knows? And they were just like, nobody in the world would lend to me. And that's the kind
Yeah.
of thing they don't talk about when they're like, just get the job, just go to law school, just do you're not just saying take on 3 years of pain. You're
Right.
potentially throwing off a lifetime of economic security.
Right. Right. No, it's real. It's real. And so, if I may ask, how you talked about how your first 5 or 6 years really burnt you out because you're trying to do so many things all by yourself and, with the help of with your board, but you kind of ran yourself into the ground. So how did you change your work structure, your personal life and professional habits to, lead the organization in a more sustainable way?
I took a break. Same with the bar.
Really?
Right? A sabbatical. That notion of rest is so important. I am a disciple in the church of the NAP ministry, I guess, Patricia Hershey's book on rest is resistance. But I took a break. I took, maybe it was 3 to 5 months, where I was just like, we're going to pause everything. I just need to think. And I learned later in this year, actually, with our program redesign, had the team at UCSF come talk about stereotype threat. And how, when you have to label your identity before you take a test, it can basically raise a stereotype in your mind and then you do more poorly on the test. So if you're a woman taking a math test and you have to check a box that says I'm a woman, you will perform more poorly on the math test. And it's because our brains are very amazing, right? When we're under threat, when we feel threatened, our survival brain gets activated. And that's this place down here that's basically whatever we got to do, survive. One thing it does is it shuts down your frontal lobe. It shuts down your ability to strategize. This is where you learn. This is where you strategize. If you're spiritual, this is your third eye, the ability to see beyond sight. That happens here. And when you're under threat, when you're afraid, it shuts this down. So for myself, I was afraid. I was like, oh man, it was like when I was burned out, it felt like the bottom was constantly going to fall out. The money wasn't going to come. I know this is going to be a failure. I'm going to I was going through these cycles in my mind and I literally couldn't see the next thing. I took
Yeah.
a break. I set some intentions. I talked to my fear. And that might sound silly, but I think it's in some ways where our nation is now,
Yeah.
just really stuck in fear. And so we can't strategize.
Hmm.
So a part of our workforce development is talking to our fear. And our
Yeah.
classes go there. Our classes are like, how do you get back to your learning
Mm.
brain? Because you can't figure out a career over years if you can't get past what's right in front of you. You
Right.
have to see
That's
farther.
powerful.
So I took the time, I saw farther, and I saw I'm a workaholic. So I need a structure that does not facilitate my workaholism. We have a 4-day work week at
Okay.
ESQ Apprentice, and we've even been more productive, I would say, with the 4-day work week.
Wow.
Um, I take every Friday off and do things I love like this, but it's me and I'm more
Yeah.
balanced and I'm
Okay.
also a very efficient worker. So I figured out how I work best and
Ooh.
I created a structure to support efficient bursts of work that's
Yeah.
balanced with my life. I started writing more. I started talking to more people and I had to be like, you know what? I'm ready for this organization to shut down. I'm not afraid of it anymore. If I can't do it in a balanced way, then it's actually not sustainable and it
Mm.
needs to stop. And once I allowed myself to go there, to my worst fear that I would fail this thing and all these people were invested in me and I would let them all down. Once I was like, if it's not sustainable, then it shouldn't be, right?
Absolutely.
Once I went
Absolutely.
there, a new structure came into mind, new program. It was like,
Yeah.
okay. And now I think we got the sauce. We're doing it. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, you're dropping gems here, Rachel, because I think that's a key to organizational leadership, especially in the nonprofit space. I believe that as organizational leaders, like we have to always face the reality, be prepared, acknowledge the fact that we may need to shut this organization down at some point, right? And to me, that has been of relief, in many ways, right? Because you're
Yeah.
like, it's okay if at some point we need to shut this thing down. And it's never come to that point with any of
Yeah.
the organizations I've been a part of. But being able to acknowledge that, and it helps like really kind of reframe some of the problems that may be facing at that time, and also kind of take into consideration, like, if that's going to be the case, what's the legacy that we're leaving? What are we doing that's going to really matter right now? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And because, yeah, I think you can, get stir crazy, drive yourself crazy, run yourself down into the ground, like I said, trying to do something that doesn't really work. That, it's either just not
Right.
helping people, or it's just not the right strategy, for
Right.
this
Or it
moment in
doesn't work
time,
for you.
or it doesn't work for you personally.
You must care for yourself because
Mm,
this is a movement and not a moment. And you
yeah.
you got to be here for a while. And I
Yeah.
think for a lot of folks, and I would say especially for women and maybe especially for women of color and maybe especially for women of color who grew up in the church in the South, like the sense
Mhm.
of obligation and duty is so it's
Yeah.
like I owe the world everything, and I don't. As a leader, if you know something isn't working for you, you have to stop and get, this isn't working for me. And that
Right.
matter. And that
Right.
matters.
Right.
And that
Wow.
matters because you got to be here for a long time.
So now you have some staff now, right?
Yes.
And so can you tell us a little bit about kind of that transition for you, going from someone who did everything to then having people that are there to you've hired, you're paying to do
Yeah.
some of these things for you. But I know with that experience, like, you've done it yourself, you've done it your particular way for so long, handing over and trusting someone else with those responsibilities can be a real challenge for a lot of founders. Can you talk about that a little
Yeah.
bit?
It was challenging indeed. I would say again, I had a foundation with a program officer who was a woman of color who made a landmark investment. So we got a $250,000 grant, and all the money came
Wow.
in at once. And that was basically what Echoing Green did to get us started. That was like,
Yeah.
now you can grow. There aren't a lot of that was a Stepsky Foundation. Unfortunately, they're a spin down.
Yeah,
So
but they're
I don't know
great.
if they're taking
Yeah.
on, but they're awesome. Again, I think could see the infrastructure for freedom and be like, invest. So very grateful for them. And with their support, again, 2 or 3 more came that were like, oh, we're going to give some more. So
Yeah.
I was able to make my first 2 hires. I hired operations and programs first. And operations, I would say, is the right first hire. It took a couple of rounds of operations to figure out like exactly how it works because again, I've been doing it all myself. So I didn't know that operations was like, basically keeping, I kept the lights on, but the
Right.
operations keeps the wheels turning, if that makes sense. Like we had lights
Sure.
on, but the car was parked. And so it took a couple of rounds, but I finally met someone who was an operations professional and didn't actually bring them on as staff, brought them on as a contractor because at
Okay.
full time, we couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
But at part time, an expert can be worth 2,
Really
3
effective.
staff members.
100%.
So I interviewed this person. They were like, my job is basically to keep the wheels running. Everything that you need to enact your vision, I am responsible for. And they took that very seriously. So operations, absolutely great first hire. And then programs went back and forth. We had a director at one point, but that was probably a part of me letting go too. Like when I have a clear vision, I was met with a person who like had their own vision and the visions didn't make a beautiful picture. So ended up like revamping programs as well. And now I have 2 apprentices. So I have enough experience. You have to be a licensed attorney, 5 years, continuously active with the State Bar of California to supervise an apprentice. So now I can supervise 2 apprentices and they are my program staff for our pre-apprenticeship accelerator. So I supervise their study and they help get the accelerator going when we go cohort to cohort. And I love the model. It's one of those things, going back to my first generation board, which was like product is king. When we hit a snag with like, what do we do with the apprenticeship program if we're not the holistic service provider? What do we do? I was like, okay, let me figure it out. So I have 2 apprentices now. We're figuring it out. I think we've got something that works. The beautiful thing about apprenticeship in California, it takes 4 years of part-time study in a law office or judge's chambers to be eligible to sit for the California bar. You also got to do some testing along the way. So you have to do monthly tests and then pass the baby bar, smaller version of the bar exam at the end of the first year in order to continue on to the subsequent years. And so what that means is that the 2 people I hired, I can pay a really lovely wage to work part-time. They can also seek additional opportunities elsewhere if they want, but it's super flexible. Their studies kind of built into their work with me. And so now I know that as I'm like helping other law firms and attorneys who are like, I want to host an apprentice.
Yeah.
You've got to work their study into it. So maybe it's 4 days, 0.8 FTE. They're doing their law office stuff, but they need a day to study. It's for those attorneys who are like, yeah, one day I want them to take over this firm for me, or I see the benefit of waiting 5 years for this advocate who's been raised up in my image and my way and the benefit of that, then I think it works beautifully. But I've got a whole group of women, mostly one guy, hi Clay, who handles social media marketing, an executive assistant, operations. What else do we have? Fundraising and development. That's the thing that, nonprofit directors tend to have to do a lot of, but I hate it. I do not love schmoozing. I do not love I don't love anything that feels deceptive. You know what I mean? And sometimes, luckily I found someone who's able to like walk that line and like.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's now my contractor community in addition to my staff.
Yeah.
Works. And it's kind of working for us. We have very limited resources still.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still the only full-time staff, 2 part-time staff, but a whole slew of sister consultants who make this work.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so final question is, how are you, viewing the work ahead? What are your plans organizationally to, build towards the organization that you.
Yeah. So the 3-part answer to that question. 1, to continue to pilot or scale our program. So we've now got 3 programs, our pre-apprenticeship program, where you get like a taste of the legal profession. You can make an informed choice about whether to pursue apprenticeship. Our paralegal paralegal program because, as you might have mentioned earlier, paralegal jobs can be a really steady career. And paralegals often know, it's like nurses to doctors, know a lot more than lawyers. You can find your balance. You can find economic security. The license is always a North Star, but you can still support yourself and your family with a good legal administrative role. So we have our paralegal program. We partner with community colleges to get folks a free paralegal certification. And then we have our apprenticeship program where right now it's folks finding the attorneys and then we help them like figure out how to make it work at their firm. In the future, I would love it if we were like a one-stop shop for, not just the attorneys. Like I would love to have a place where women of color could start their own firms. So like an apprentice, once they get their license, has a safe landing place to start their firm. And then more apprentices would be their administrators. And everyone gets economically secure and it grows and grows. And we start providing the resources that our communities need and have like little legal hubs. And then, I see that for the program side and, placing apprentices in different law firms throughout the state of California. I'd love to do that. But the other thing that I'm really excited about, the vision I see, when Roe v. Wade, I was the director of the Center on Reproductive Rights and Justice at Berkeley Law School. And reproductive justice, when I worked at that prison abolitionist org, that's where I became a reproductive justice advocate too, because sterilization is part and parcel of the prison system, slavery system, genocide, etc. So I'm a reproductive justice advocate. A lot of people get stuck on abortion with reproductive justice, but it is the ability to choose a family or not, and the ability to raise the families we do choose in safety and with dignity and respect. So all this workforce development that I do is that and with safety, dignity, and respect piece. But when Roe fell, I was kind of surprised that there wasn't a movement ready to be like, and this is what we replace. This is what we do instead. Yeah. Because they have been coming for it for a cool 4 decades, right? Like it was like, we knew this was happening and then it fell and we were like, what's going on? And so I'm really inspired, especially with this regime in power currently, to not get caught unawares again. I would love to start a policy arm to the work that we do that centers the experiences of the women in our program and women in their communities, gets them together to talk about what they need to thrive, and then build policy from those needs on up instead of what we get, which is like a busted constitution from the start on down and scraping to try to keep some civil rights. So I'm calling it the Legacy Foundation, and it is a direct nod to the Heritage Foundation, because heritage is what was, but legacy is what will be. And I don't love anything about the Heritage Foundation, but one thing they did do is throw spaghetti at the wall until it stuck. And I think I don't know that we have kind of a creative legal generator.
Careful, too calculated. Yeah.
Right. Who's just risk like, adverse. What if there were no limit? What if we opened up? What if we weren't afraid? What if we were strategically thinking with an endless universe out of abundance? What could stick? What could stick? And I would love to get that going, because that was like my 10-year plan. But then these fools got in office and I was like, we might need to up this a little bit. I think there's a lot of folks ready for a different world, perhaps a new constitution. Yeah. Let's start over out of abundance instead of out of scarcity. Let's start over with inclusivity instead of exclusivity, right? So the Legacy Foundation, our programs currently scaling, growing them, getting folks jobs to a place of economic security, and then taking those strategic, creative people and creating the Legacy Foundation, a creative space in law where we generate the laws we deserve instead of kind of scraping towards the laws we've been handed.
Ooh, I'm inspired. I love the bold vision. Let's do it. Let's do it.
Speak it into existence. I don't know.
Speak it into existence.
Right.
Hey, yeah, it'll happen. That's awesome. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. Share your personal experiences as a nonprofit leader and your challenges and the successes along the way of ESQ Apprentice. And this has been really fun.
Yeah,
I think listeners are going to love this conversation and have some really helpful takeaways. Thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Jordan. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to How to Build a Nonprofit. If you liked the episode, check out the show notes for a link to donate to our guest organization and give us a rave review while you're at it. Feel free to leave comments and questions on your app about what intrigued you most. If you have any suggestions for future guests, email us at howtobuildanonprofit@gmail.com.